first gunshot shattered the wine glass directly above Naomi Carter's head. She dropped instantly, champagne soaking into her second-hand dress as she hit the marble floor. Around her, Seattle's wealthiest people screamed and scrambled, designer heels clicking frantically against polished tile. Someone's clutch purse flew past her face. A bodyguard crumpled 3 feet away, blood spreading slowly across the white tablecloth that had fallen with him. Naomi pressed herself flat and crawled beneath the table, her whole body shaking so violently she could barely move. The rooftop restaurant had transformed in under 4 seconds from elegant silence to pure carnage. Chandeliers swayed from the percussion of gunfire. Emergency lighting clicked on, bathing everything in cold red. She could hear them, masked men moving between tables, controlled, practiced, not panicking like the guests. These men had come here with a purpose. Then a hand closed around her wrist. Not roughly, not dragging her. Firm and deliberate, like someone making a decision. She looked up. Adrian Vale crouched beside her, his black tailored coat unmarked despite the chaos surrounding him. His face was completely calm. Not the calm of someone pretending to be brave. The calm of someone who had lived inside moments exactly like this one before. He reloaded a handgun with one smooth motion and met her eyes without flinching. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. "If you want to live." She had no choice. She took his hand. 3 hours earlier, Naomi had been standing outside the elevator on the 42nd floor of the Caldwell Tower, already regretting every decision that had led her here. Her cousin Maya had called her that afternoon in a panic. One of the event hostesses had canceled at the last minute. The client was impossible. The pay was extraordinary. All Naomi had to do was look presentable, serve as background presence at a private dinner, and not say anything embarrassing. Maya had repeated that last part twice. Naomi had said yes because her rent was due in 4 days and her archival history scholarship only stretched so far. She had borrowed Maya's nicest dress, which fit slightly wrong across the shoulders, pinned her dark hair back, and told herself she could endure 3 hours of wealthy people ignoring her. She had not anticipated feeling quite this invisible. The rooftop restaurant was the kind of place that made ordinary people feel like a mistake. Everything was deliberate. The spacing between tables, the temperature of the air, the way the staff moved like they had rehearsed their footsteps. Floor-to-ceiling glass looked out over Elliott Bay, where the water caught the last of the evening light and turned it silver. The guests wore things that cost more than Naomi's annual tuition. She stood near the service corridor and watched them, a habit from years of being the quietest person in every room, observing instead of participating. A man near the bar laughed too loudly at something that wasn't funny. 2 women near the window assessed each other's jewelry with surgical precision. Everyone was performing something. Then the room changed. It happened without announcement. One moment there was the soft murmur of expensive conversation. The next, a silence moved through the room like a cold current passing through warm water. Guests who had been mid-sentence simply stopped. Security personnel who had been relaxed straightened almost imperceptibly. Adrian Vale had arrived. Naomi had never seen him before, but she understood immediately why the room reacted the way it did. He was tall, composed, and completely indifferent to the effect he had on people. Early 30s, black coat, no tie, the kind of effortless presentation that communicated he had nothing to prove to anyone in this building. He moved through the parting crowd without acknowledging the deference they were showing him, as if their fear was simply whether he had learned to walk through. Maya appeared at Naomi's elbow and grabbed her arm. "Don't stare," she whispered tightly. "Who is he?" "Adrian Vale. He owns 3 private equity firms and something else nobody talks about openly." Maya's voice dropped further. "Just don't end up near him. He makes people very uncomfortable." Naomi intended to follow that advice. Then the seating assignments came out, and she discovered she had been placed directly beside him. She almost walked out. She looked at the exit twice, but Maya gave her a desperate look from across the room, and Naomi thought about 4 days and overdue rent, and she sat down. The dinner began. Course after course arrived with quiet precision. The conversation around the table flowed in that particular register of powerful people. Coded, referential, full of names dropped like small weapons. Naomi kept her eyes on her plate and said nothing. Adrian Vale said very little either. He ate in measured silence, occasionally responding to comments directed at him with a single sentence that managed to close the topic entirely. Nobody pushed back. Nobody tried twice. Then Victor Hahn arrived late and took the empty seat across from Naomi. She recognized the shift in the room immediately. If Adrian's presence created cold silence, Victor Hahn's created something more complicated. People smiled at him, but their eyes didn't. He was older, silver at his temples, wearing the kind of relaxed confidence that came from enjoying other people's discomfort. He looked at Naomi and smiled like he already knew something she didn't. "And who is this?" he asked, not to her, but about her, speaking to the table as though she were decoration. Before anyone answered, his expression shifted into sympathy. He glanced at her dress, specifically at the place near the shoulder where the fit was slightly wrong, and then at her hands, which were not the hands of someone who had grown up attending dinners like this. He didn't say anything directly cruel. He didn't have to. He simply let the observation sit there for the whole table to absorb. Someone across from her laughed quietly into their wine glass. Heat rose up Naomi's neck. She kept her expression neutral with enormous effort, the way she had learned to do in every room that had ever made her feel small. That was when Adrian's voice came from beside her. Low. Not loud enough for the whole table, but perfectly audible to Victor. Careful. Just that word. Like a door being closed. Victor smiled wider, unbothered. He reached into his jacket and produced a small card, slid it across the table toward Naomi with 2 fingers. "I'm always looking for interesting assistants. If tonight becomes too much for you, use that." Then he looked at Adrian with naked satisfaction, watching for a reaction. Adrian looked at Naomi instead. She saw something working behind his eyes. Calculation, suspicion, and something else she couldn't name yet. Slowly, deliberately, he removed a folded arrangement of bills from his inside pocket. He set it on the table beside her glass without a word. Not dramatic, clinical. "Take it," he said quietly, "and leave before dessert." She stared at it. The implication was clear. He believed she was planted. Part of whatever game Victor was running. A prop placed beside him to manufacture some emotional reaction he refused to give. Naomi looked at the money. She looked at Victor's satisfied expression. She looked at Adrian. Then she pushed the money back across the table toward him. "I'm not here for either of you," she said. Her voice was steady. She was genuinely surprised by that. "I'm here because my cousin needed someone to fill a seat. So I'll be finishing my dinner, and then I'll leave on my own timeline." Silence. Victor raised an eyebrow, amused. Adrian studied her for one long moment. Said nothing. Took the money back. Naomi returned to her plate, hands steady, heart absolutely pounding. She had no way of knowing that small act of refusal had just rewritten what the rest of her night was going to look like. 40 minutes later, the first gunshot went off. Now she was moving through smoke and chaos with Adrian Vale's hand tight around hers. And she was learning very quickly that the man beside her was not primarily a businessman. He moved through the panicking crowd like he was reading a map only he could see. Pulling her left before she understood why, then right, then down behind an overturned service cart as a burst of gunfire tore through the space they'd just crossed. She heard herself make a sound she didn't recognize and felt him squeeze her hand once. Fast. "Don't freeze," he said. She didn't. He got a door open at the far end of the rooftop, a service exit, unmarked, the kind of door that wasn't on any guest map. He pushed her through first. As she stumbled into a concrete stairwell, she heard him behind her firing twice with precise economy. Then the door slammed shut and he was already moving past her, leading her down. "Who are those men?" she managed. "Victor's." "He hired people to shoot up a dinner?" "He hired people to shoot me," Adrian said without particular emotion. The dinner was just the location. They reached a sublevel she hadn't known the building had. He pressed his palm against a panel, and a door opened into a tunnel that smelled like concrete and cold air. Service infrastructure, pipes and cable lines running along low ceilings, dim yellow lighting. Naomi stopped walking. Where does this go? He looked back at her. Somewhere safer than here. That's not an answer. Something crossed his face. Not quite a surprise. Closer to recalibration. It connects to a private parking structure 2 buildings west. I have a car there. He paused. You can call someone from there. But right now we need to move. She moved. Asterisk if you're already hooked. And we know you are. Hit that like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. The next part is where everything changes. Asterisk. The car was black, unmarked, and already running when they reached it. A man Naomi hadn't seen before was behind the wheel. He didn't turn around or ask questions. Just pulled out of the structure the moment Adrian's door closed, moving through the underground exit with practiced ease. Naomi sat in the back with her ruined dress and her still shaking hands and tried to organize her thoughts into something useful. I need to call my cousin, she said. Maya works events for Harrington Hospitality, Adrian said, not looking at her. Victor Hahn is a majority shareholder. He's had eyes on that company for 2 years. Naomi went still. What does that mean? It means your cousin's presence tonight may not have been accidental. The words landed like cold water. She wanted to argue with them. She pulled out her phone and called Maya. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. She called again. Same result. She lowered the phone slowly and looked out the window at Seattle moving past. Wet streets, distant lights, the ordinary city continuing without any awareness of what had just happened 40 stories above it. The normalcy felt surreal. Where are you taking me? She asked. Somewhere Victor's people don't have access to. I didn't agree to go anywhere with you. Adrian finally looked at her. You're right. You didn't. He held her gaze for a moment. I can stop this car and let you out anywhere you'd like. But understand, the men on that rooftop saw your face. They saw you leave with me. Victor Hahn uses information efficiently. By morning, your name and address will be as useful to him as mine. Naomi felt the walls of the situation closing in, not from Adrian, but from the logic of what he was saying. She hated that she could already see he was right. So you're saying I don't actually have a choice. I'm saying the choice you had existed about 4 hours ago, before you sat down at that table. He looked away again. I'm sorry you're in this. It was such an unexpected thing for him to say that she didn't respond for a long moment. You're sorry, she repeated. You refused the money, he said quietly. Most people would have taken it and left. You didn't, and I couldn't tell then whether that was courage or a very good performance. He paused. I think now it was courage. She didn't know what to do with that. She turned back to the window and said nothing for the rest of the drive. The penthouse was on the 38th floor of a building that didn't have his name on it anywhere. That detail struck her as she stepped inside. Nothing here advertised who owned it. It was furnished in clean, spare lines. Functional luxury. The kind of space that said the person who used it was not interested in impressing anyone. She stood in the center of the main room and became aware, gradually, of how quiet it was. There's a room at the end of the hall, Adrian said. He had moved to a desk near the window and was already on a phone call, speaking in clipped, rapid sentences to someone she couldn't identify. Get some sleep. I'm not going to sleep. Then don't. There's a kitchen. He turned back to his call. Naomi sat on the couch and watched him work. She didn't intend to observe him the way she did. It was just a habit, studying people when she was trying to understand a situation. And Adrian Vale was a situation she desperately needed to understand. He made 3 calls in 20 minutes. Each one was brief, precise, containing just enough information and no more. When he finished the last call, he stood at the window looking out over the city for a long moment with his hands in his pockets. From this angle, she could see what the restaurant lighting had hidden. A long scar running up the left side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. And another on the back of his right hand. He'd been in violence before, many times and over a long period. That wasn't a businessman's body. That was a survivor's. How long has Victor been trying to kill you? She asked. He didn't turn around. About 4 years. Why? A pause. Business disagreement. That's not the full answer. He turned around then, and his expression was unreadable in the way that told her he was deciding how much she could be trusted with. You're observant, he said. I study history, specifically the kind that people try to bury. I'm used to reading between what's on the surface. Something shifted in his face. Not quite warmth. More like the edge of recognition, the way people looked when they encountered something they weren't expecting. Victor believes I cost him something that can't be replaced, Adrian said finally. He's been dismantling everything around me for years before trying to get to me directly. Associates. Resources. He paused. People. The weight in that last word was immense. Before she could respond, his jacket shifted as he moved and she saw it. A dark, spreading stain on his left side. She was across the room before she'd made a decision. You've been hit. It's a graze. That is not a graze. She pushed his hand away from where he'd been pressing it against his ribs, and he let her, which surprised her more than the wound. Up close, she could see the tension he'd been holding in his jaw for the last hour. Controlled pain. Sit down. I'm fine. Adrian. She said his name without thinking about it, and the familiarity of it in her own mouth startled her. Sit down. He sat. She found a first aid kit behind a panel in the bathroom. Of course there was one, of course he knew exactly where it was, and came back and worked quickly. He watched her hands the entire time. Not suspiciously. More like he was trying to understand something. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. She didn't look up from what she was doing. Because you're injured. People who are injured around me usually receive that injury because of me. And people who are sitting next to you at dinner usually end up crawling across the floor, she said. We've both had a difficult evening. Hold still. A pause. Nobody talks to me like that. You should have better people around you then. She finished and sat back. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't fully categorize. Everyone near me eventually gets hurt, he said. That's not self-pity. It's a documented pattern. So don't let me get hurt, she said simply. He looked at her for a long moment. You make it sound straightforward. Most things are until they're not. She found out the truth about herself in the worst possible way. It was 3 a.m. and she couldn't sleep, which was entirely unsurprising given the circumstances. She'd pulled a blanket around her shoulders and was sitting near the hallway when she heard Adrian on another call. She wasn't trying to listen, but the words found her anyway. Victor chose her deliberately. Adrian's voice was flat, but something underneath it wasn't. The physical resemblance alone, yes. I understand what he was doing. A long pause. She doesn't know. Keep it that way. Naomi stopped breathing. She sat completely still and waited until the call ended. Then she waited another 10 minutes, organizing her thoughts the way she did when she found a piece of corrupted archival information. Don't react until you have the full picture. Build what you know. Identify the gaps. What she knew. Victor Hahn had orchestrated her presence at that dinner. Not randomly, deliberately, because of something she represented to Adrian. A resemblance to someone Adrian had lost. She thought about the weight in his voice when he'd said the word people. She thought about the scar on his neck and the sleeplessness she'd observed in him. Not the sleeplessness of a busy man, but the sleeplessness of someone who hadn't truly rested in years. Someone carrying grief like infrastructure, built into every load-bearing wall. Victor hadn't been trying to embarrass Adrian at that dinner. He'd been trying to break him, and Naomi had been the instrument. When Adrian emerged from the office, she was sitting in the main room with the lights on. He stopped when he saw her face. How much did you hear? He asked. Enough. She held his gaze. Who did I remind you of? A long silence. Something moved through his expression, a crack in the composite. Just briefly. Then it closed again. This isn't something you need to know. I think I've earned it. He stood very still for a moment. Then he walked to the window and stood with his back to her, looking at the dark water far below. When he spoke, his voice was different. Stripped of the precision he normally used, left with something rawer underneath. Her name was Elise, he said. She was someone I was trying to protect. 4 years ago, Victor found her before I could move her out of reach. He stopped. I've been dismantling his operation since then. One piece at a time. Naomi absorbed this slowly. And I look like her. Enough that Victor knew exactly what it would do to me to see you placed beside me. To wonder, for just a moment. He stopped again. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it without complication. He turned around, and for the first time she saw what was under all the control. Not hardness but exhaustion. The specific exhaustion of someone who had been alone inside a war for a very long time. You should sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be worse. He was right about that. Maya's text arrived at 6:47 in the morning. Except it wasn't from Maya. It was from a number Naomi didn't recognize, and it contained a single image. Maya, in what appeared to be a basement or warehouse, seated in a chair with her hands bound, looking terrified but unharmed. Below the image, a message. Trade Adrian Vale's location for your cousin. You have 12 hours. Tell him and she dies. Naomi stared at the screen for a very long time. Then she walked into the main room and handed the phone to Adrian without a word. He looked at it. His expression didn't change, but his stillness became a different quality of stillness, the kind that preceded violence. They have her, Naomi said. Victor has my cousin. Yes. This is because of me. Because I'm involved with you. This is because of Victor, he said firmly. Not because of you. The distinction doesn't change that she's in a chair somewhere scared out of her mind. Naomi's voice was steady, but she could feel something hardening inside her chest. Not panic, but determination, which surprised her. We're going to get her back. He looked up from the phone. I'm not sitting in this penthouse while my cousin pays for my involvement in something she didn't choose either. Naomi, tell me you have people who can find where they're holding her. A pause. He made a call. Finding Maya took 4 hours. Confirming her location and extracting a viable route took another 2. During that time, Naomi watched Adrian operate at a level she had no framework for. A quiet, devastating efficiency that made clear he had done this kind of thing many times before. He coordinated across multiple people she never saw, assessed information as it arrived, and rejected 2 possible approaches before settling on a third. She didn't stay out of the way passively. She asked questions. She looked at maps. She processed information alongside him, not because she had tactical training, but because she had a mind that was built for reading patterns in complicated material, and this, terrible as it was still a pattern. At one point he glanced at her across the table of collected information and said, You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Panic, tears, demands that I fix everything immediately. Would that have helped?
No.
Then I'm not interested in it, she said. Something in his expression shifted. Respect, she thought, though it moved through him quickly. He returned to the map. The route they identified took them through a corporate parking structure 6 blocks from the waterfront. Adrian's contact believed Victor's men were using it as a transit point. They would move Maya to the shipping terminal after dark. The window to intercept was narrow. They took it anyway. The ambush came 3 levels below ground. It was perfectly timed. She'd give Victor's people that much. For vehicles converged simultaneously from 2 directions, cutting off the route forward and the route back. Adrian's driver went down in the first volley, and the car lurched into a concrete pillar. Naomi hit the door hard enough to see white. Then she heard Adrian's voice. Get down and stay down. She got down. But she didn't stay down. Through the ringing in her ears, she assessed the space. Parking structure. Sprinkler suppression system. The control panel she'd seen on the wall as they came down the ramp. She looked at the distance. She looked at the chaos between her and it. She moved. She heard Adrian shout her name. Real alarm in his voice, the first time she'd heard anything uncontrolled in him. And she ran along the wall low, using the parked cars as cover. She reached the panel, found the manual override, and hit it. The sprinklers erupted across the entire level simultaneously. The effect on the ambush was immediate. Visibility collapsed. Footing became treacherous. The careful coordination of the ambush team fractured as they lost visual contact with each other. Adrian used the 15 seconds it bought with brutal efficiency. When the chaos cleared, they were moving again. Back in the car, a different car, retrieved from somewhere. Adrian looked at her. Water was running down her face. Her shoulder ached from where she'd hit the door. "You could have died," he said. "So could you," she said. "Did it work?" A pause. "Yes." "Then it was worth it." He looked at her for a long moment. She had the impression of someone encountering an equation that wasn't resolving the way they expected. "Where did that come from?" he asked. "I've been the quiet girl in the back of the room my entire life," she said. "I paid a lot of attention while nobody was looking." Don't go anywhere. The finale is everything you've been waiting for. If the story has you gripped, subscribe right now and hit the bell so you catch every upload. Share this with someone who needs a story they can't put down. The lake house was 40 minutes outside the city. It was small and gray and surrounded by Douglas firs that made the whole property feel hidden from the world. Naomi sat on the wooden steps outside and looked at the water while Adrian made arrangements for the approach to the terminal. The evening light was going, turning the lake the color of pewter, and she was aware of how completely her life had changed in the space of 24 hours. She heard the door behind her and didn't turn around. Adrian sat beside her on the steps. He didn't say anything immediately, which she had learned was characteristic. He processed before he spoke, always, and he never filled silence with something empty. "I can get you out tonight," he said finally. "Before we move on to the terminal. Clean exit. New documentation. Temporary accommodation. Victor's focus will shift to me once we extract Maya. You've been trying to get rid of me since the parking garage," she said. "I've been trying to keep you alive since the parking garage. Those aren't the same thing." She looked at him. "What happened to Elise? You weren't able to stop it." His jaw tightened. "No. And you've been carrying that for 4 years. I made decisions that left her exposed. The consequences were permanent. And now you're trying to make a different decision." She held his gaze. "By pushing me away before something happens to me too." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "I'm not her," Naomi said gently. "And you're not the same person you were 4 years ago. You know more. You're better prepared. And this time," she paused, "you're not alone." Something happened to his face that she suspected very few people had ever seen. Not collapse, just opening. The smallest degree, like a room that had been sealed for years, allowing the thinnest thread of outside air. "You should want to leave," he said. "Probably. Why don't you?" She thought about it honestly. "Because I've been invisible my whole life. Quiet, careful, occupying as little space as possible so nobody would have reason to dismiss me again." She looked at the water. "And somewhere in the last 24 hours I stopped doing that. I don't want to go back to doing it." He was quiet for a moment. "Staying with me is not a solution to invisibility." "I know. But staying with me is apparently not something you know how to do either, and maybe we're both figuring something out here." He looked at her for a long time. She didn't look away. "If something happens to you tomorrow," he started. "Then we make sure it doesn't," she said. The abandoned shipping terminal sat on the industrial waterfront south of the city, enormous and lightless against the night sky. Rusted container frames cast long shadows across the cracked concrete. The sound of the water was constant. They went in with 4 of Adrian's people, quiet and coordinated, splitting into approach positions while Naomi stayed with the rear guard, watching the communications feed. She had argued for more. Adrian had said this was not a negotiation, and she had read his face and understood he needed her at a distance to function properly, so she stayed. She heard it all through the earpiece. Victor Hahn's voice, when it came, was almost conversational. "Adrian, I knew you'd come." A pause. "I wasn't sure she would." "That's interesting. Where is Maya Carter?" Adrian's voice. "Nearby, unharmed." "I'm not interested in her." Victor's tone shifted slightly. "I'm interested in whether you understand what you're doing. You're rebuilding the exact same structure. Same choices. Same blind spots." A pause. "And you've placed another woman at the center of it. He's trying to get into your head," Naomi said quietly into the calm. "Don't let him." A beat of silence. The girl can hear us? Victor sounded genuinely entertained. Naomi, do you know how many people have tried to stay close to him? Do you know where they all are? She kept her voice even. I know where you're going to be in about 30 seconds, which is surrounded. So I'd focus on that. Victor laughed. Then the comms exploded with movement. Adrian's people breaching from two sides. Victor's men responding. The terminal filling with the sound of boots and shouting and two sharp exchanges of gunfire. Naomi tracked it on the feed with her heart in her throat. She heard Maya's voice. Terrified, alive, and exhaled. Then she heard something shift. Naomi. Victor Hahn's voice, suddenly clear and close. Not through the comms. Behind her. She turned. He had moved during the breach. Flanked the entire approach while his men created the distraction. He was calm, unhurried, and he had a hand on her arm before she could move. Not tight enough to hurt. Demonstrative. Tell him to stand down, Victor said, or this becomes something no one recovers from. She pressed the calm. I'm fine, she said, and her voice was completely steady. Victor is using me as a pressure point. Don't change the approach. A silence. Then Adrian's voice, and it was different. The control she'd watched him maintain across 24 hours of constant threat was gone. What replaced it was something colder and more absolute than control had ever been. Let her go, he said. Now. Or what? Victor asked. Or this ends in a way that took me 4 years to arrange, and I stop caring what it costs. Victor looked at Naomi's face, reading her reaction, looking for leverage in it. He found nothing he could use. She looked back at him with the steadiness she'd built in every quiet, overlooked, underestimated year of her life, and she didn't flinch. Victor's composure broke first. Just slightly, just enough. And that was the opening Adrian used. 3 days later, the penthouse felt different. Quieter. Lighter somehow, in a way she couldn't fully explain. Maya was safe, debriefed, and had spent 48 hours cycling between traumatized tears and furious demands for the complete story. Naomi had given her most of it. Victor Hahn was in custody. The details of his network's collapse were the kind that traveled through certain circles in whispers. Adrian had been thorough and patient and had dismantled 4 years of infrastructure in a single night. She found him at the window, as she often did, looking at the water. He turned when she came in. On the low table beside him, a passport, an envelope of documents, a cell phone already loaded with contacts, a complete exit package. Clean, thorough, total. You said you'd know when it was over, she said. It's over. She looked at the passport. Her photo, a different name, a different life, fully assembled, ready to step into. She looked at the window, at Seattle below, ordinary and continuous. She looked at him. Then she set the passport back on the table and sat down on the couch. He stood very still. You're not leaving, he said. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? She thought about the girl who had borrowed her cousin's dress and rode an elevator to a party she didn't belong to. So certain that the best she could hope for was to be invisible and leave unnoticed. I'm saying I'm done being the girl who disappears when someone expects her to, she said. I decide where I go from here, on my own timeline. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked across the room and sat beside her. Not far, not close, the precise measured distance of someone who was learning, carefully and deliberately, what it felt like to stop being alone. The city moved below them. She stayed. The girl who once made herself invisible had learned something no amount of money or power could teach, that the most dangerous thing in any room was a quiet person who'd finally decided to be seen. And that's the end of this story, and if it kept you glued all the way to here, you already know what to do. Hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you're not already. We drop new stories every week, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. Share this with one friend who loves a story that hits hard. And drop a comment below. Tell us, did you trust Adrian from the beginning? Or did he have to earn it? We read every single one. See you in the next story.